Genesis or something? Is that what it was? Yeah, okay. All right. I know that, and I appreciate that. I just want you to know that a couple folks did move up this this week, and I'm appreciative of it. Okay, all right,
Should be there.
all right. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. I told Terry Ann and Pam the reason I needed people to move up is when I ask for y'all to participate, I can't hear what y'all say. Because because I'm old and the ears don't work anymore. Okay, let's continue with our study in the book of Proverbs, which we have entitled, stealing the title from Brother Tommy South and his work on the book of Proverbs. Don't be dumb, the wisdom of Proverbs today. And I do want to welcome Norm and Carol Sykes. Siders, is that right? Okay. Visiting with us this morning, all the way from Searcy, Arkansas. Okay, all right. Do I have that right? Searcy, right? Okay, great. Great to have you. Okay. um, so, don't be dumb. The wisdom of Proverbs for today, and we're going to talk about today, don't be dumb about God. Okay. Um, we've mentioned these things already, but I think they bear repeating. I mentioned these things already in talking about the book of Proverbs. Dennis, Lisa, whatever, I'm getting the same thing I got last week. It says slide, change, era. I'm going to hit OK, see what happens. I hit OK and nothing. Oh, it did work. Okay, let's see if it goes on. Let's see if we have some success today. We've mentioned again. All right, thanks. The problem is, Mike, you can preach from memory, and I can't and hold that thing and use it and preach from memory. I got to have my notes in that thing in my Bible, and I don't have it two hands. Okay. But thank you, I appreciate it. All right. Hopefully the slides will work. We've said over and over again, as I started to say, that Proverbs is noteworthy for its intensely practical character. It's a book that gives us inspiring advice on everyday life and how to live it well, largely by avoiding bad choices that continually confront us. So it isn't where we would normally think of looking to find theology. I think it's important to define the words that we use, okay? And I've heard the word theology all of my life, and so when I was doing this and I read theology again, I said, okay, let me make sure I understand what theology means, okay? Theology literally means the knowledge of God. And we don't really think of going to Proverbs for theology, if you will, or very much information at all about God. For that, we would normally think of books like Genesis or Isaiah or Romans, but probably not Proverbs. But let's see if this works. We might ask, there we go. We might ask, what's more practical than knowing about God? And what's more impractical than to live as if God doesn't exist? So in that sense of pointing us in the direction of what pleases and displeases God, Proverbs does indeed offer a great deal of theology. And it offers guidance on how not to be dumb where God is concerned. So we're going to look at some ways this book accomplishes this. The book of Proverbs accomplishes this. And let's go over a few slides. Here are the things we're going to look at that Proverbs tells us about God. We're going to find out that Proverbs tells us indeed that God exists, that God created the world by wisdom, that God and His will can be known, that God is Lord over all of our plans, and that we are to fear God positively. And we'll talk about what it means when we say we are to fear God positively. So let's get started and see how far we can get this morning with what Proverbs tells us about God. Number one, it tells us that God exists, all right? If you do some work in Christian evidences, and I'll have some more to say about that in a little bit, it is my understanding that there are basically two kinds of atheism in the world today. One is what we usually call, and they're listed up here, one is what we usually call philosophical atheism. Again, we're going to talk about two kinds of atheism that exist in the world, philosophical and practical atheism. And when we talk about philosophical atheism, this is the denial of God's existence. And this is the one we're familiar with, or at least that we talk a lot about. The denial of God's existence based on the claim that there is evidence that proves he doesn't exist. A couple of generations ago, this kind of atheism, philosophical atheism, was not very prevalent in American culture. You know, when I was growing up, I don't know about you, those of you who are about my age or whatever, when I was growing up as a kid, I might have heard a little bit about an atheist, someone who was an atheist, okay? Not a believer in God at all, not a believer that there was a God, but I don't remember hearing much about it. I don't know whether those of you, again, are about my age or not, it was the same way it was not. So it was not very prevalent in American culture, it seems to me, a generation or a couple of generations ago. It was in the shadows, if you will. But it is now widespread, thanks to the efforts of such virulent atheists such as Richard Dawkins. I don't know if you've heard of any of these names. Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and there are some others. And not only is philosophical atheism more prevalent than in the past, but it has, within the space of only a few decades, become extremely aggressive. And it is right in front of us. What once was largely a privately held belief is now extraordinarily in your face. It is also characterized by vicious attacks on theistic beliefs, vicious attacks on those who believe in God, vicious attacks even on those of us who do believe in God, okay? The philosophical part of it, and the philosophical part of it means the giving of evidence, has largely disappeared. Just making the claims against God is considered evidence enough, if you will. By the way, that's become extremely prevalent in our society about many things. You really don't have to have much proof. I don't know if you've noticed this or not. You don't really have to have much evidence about many things in our world today, in our culture today. In 21st century America, okay? Basically, all you have to do is make a claim, make it adamantly enough, say it loudly enough, say it as many times as you can, and then the media picks it up, and then even though you cited no evidence at all, it kind of just becomes the truth, okay? Have you noticed that? Okay, all right. It happens in many things, and that's really what's happened with atheism. They don't have to give the proof anymore. They just make claims against God, and again, that's evidence enough. And sadly, a great many people buy into this, even though they've never considered the evidence that points to God. Some of you know this. I love Christian apologetics. I love studying Christian evidences, something that's styled Christian apologetics. You know, about, I guess it's been 5 or 6 years ago now, I had the opportunity here to do a 13-week series on Christian evidences. I never studied as much for a class as I did for that. I would spend 15 to 20 hours a week preparing for the next lesson. I have in my library at home probably 17 or 18 books on Christian evidences. I have read all of most of them and parts of the others or whatever. And I want to tell you, brother, and I've said this to you before, I want to say it to you again, for anyone who maybe doesn't know this for certain. The evidence of the existence of God is abundant, compelling, and convincing. And I'm not just talking about in the pages of our Bible. I'm talking about in the secular world. The evidence for the existence of a creator is, again, overwhelming. It's compelling. It's convincing. The evidence that a man named Jesus, and the evidence in secular history, obviously it's there in the scriptures, but the evidence in secular history that a man named Jesus walked this earth about 2,000 years ago, all right, again, is abundant, okay? The evidence that a man named Jesus was crucified on a cross in secular history is there. There is even evidence in a secular history that this man Jesus somehow arose from the dead. Again, I'm telling you, in secular history, not just in the scriptures. The evidence that the Bible we have before us is indeed the authoritative, accurate, historical Word of God as given so many years ago is abundant and compelling. Do not let anyone ever convince you that those things are not true. All right? Doing the study in Christian apologetics, I always had great faith. Well, I always had a lot of faith anyway. But it has just simply enhanced my faith. It is amazing to me how much evidence there is. So that's philosophical atheism. But there's another atheism, another kind of atheism that is even more widespread today. It is sometimes termed, as the slide says, practical atheism, and it is practiced by millions. What might I be referring to, or what might be called, or what might be meant by practical atheism? Anybody, what do you think? We talked about a philosophical atheism, now we're talking about practical atheism. What might be meant by that phrase? What might be meant by that term? Practical atheism. Anyone? Anybody? Any thoughts? What might be meant by practical atheism? Yes, sir, Mike. Got to yell, buddy. Got to yell.
Just living as if there were no God.
Okay, absolutely. Okay, that is, in several words, exactly what it means. Living as if there were no God. All right? I submit to you, brethren, we see it all around us. All around us. With this form of atheism, there is no overt denial of God's existence. Practical atheists may even say that they believe in God. These folks who practice practical atheism simply live as though God doesn't exist. You don't have to raise your hand. You don't really have to. I'm not really saying this to be mean to anyone or to be accusatory toward anyone or whatever. That's not the point. Our job is to try to reach people and to be kind and gracious and loving toward people. But quite frankly, do you know anyone like that? Do you know anyone who says they believe in God but live as if they don't believe in God? Live as though God doesn't exist? Okay? Certainly you do. And I do. And it's sad. In fact, many who claim to be believers actually fall into the category of practical atheists because their lives are not affected at all by any faith convictions. Their lives are not affected at all by the fact that they say, or maybe even that they do, actually believe in God. Their life choices are not influenced by a concern for what God desires, nor do they spend any of their time pursuing the worship or knowledge of God. For all practical purposes, they might as well be philosophical atheists. All right? Now, brethren, I have no one in mind, no specific person in mind. I assure you that I do not. But I'm afraid, and I do see this from time to time, and it's sad that we have those within the church who live as practical atheists. Now that's sad, and they might be offended to be told that, but we do, and that's sad. Let's make sure that's not any of us, all right, who claim to believe in God, who claim to believe in Jesus the Christ, who Mike discussed so much with us this morning about his death on the cross, and then live as though we don't believe that. So, it isn't surprising then that Proverbs begins not with an argument for God's existence, but with a declaration of the wisdom of acknowledging Him. That is, indeed, how Proverbs begins. Early in the book of Proverbs, we've already quoted this several times. Proverbs 1 and verse 7, okay? Can anybody quote it for me? Proverbs 1 and verse 7. It was the verse that we started with when we started our study. It is a declaration of the wisdom of acknowledging God, of acknowledging Him with a capital H, okay? What's Proverbs 1 and verse 7 says? Don't turn your Bible. Yes, you can if you want to. What's it say? Do you remember? Okay? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of what? Knowledge. But fools despise wisdom and instruction, okay? Very early in the book of Proverbs, it's Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 7, so it is very early we see in Proverbs a declaration of the wisdom of acknowledging Him. In other words, it's dumb not to know God. But we see some more about acknowledging God, about knowing Him. Look at Proverbs chapter 2. Proverbs 2. And let's read verses 4 through 6. Proverbs 2, verses 4 through 6. We're actually going to come back and read some more of. I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and read it all right now. All right, we'll come back and talk about it again. Let's really read not just 4 through 6 here, because there's so much here. Let's read Proverbs 2, and let's read verses 1 through 9. My son, perhaps Solomon doing the talking here, perhaps that narrator we talked about is one of the characters that are part of the book of Proverbs. My son, if you receive my words and treasure my commands within you, so that you incline your ear to wisdom and apply your heart to understanding. Yes, if you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding. If you seek her as silver and search for her for hidden treasures. Notice verses 5 and 6. Then, if you do all of these things in seeking for wisdom, as he's already said, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Find the knowledge of God. Find that God exists. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk uprightly. He guards the paths of justice and preserves the way of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice, equity, and every good path. Here Proverbs extols the value, if you will, of seeking wisdom with words about God. It is clear that Solomon and the other sages who speak in Proverbs are in full agreement with Psalms 14. Turn to Psalms 14. Psalms 14, verses 1 and 2. Anybody remember what that says? Psalm 14, 1 and 2. I'll start it for you. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. Our brother Gary Ball, not here this morning. I think Gary and June are probably traveling, but Gary quoted this to us 2 or 3 weeks ago. But let's look at it again and see that, again, the psalmist agrees with the wisdom that we read from the book of Proverbs here. Psalm 14, verses 1 and 2. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek God. Stay with that passage just for a moment or two. Let's talk a little bit about it. Again, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God, and the passage continues from there. Notice, if you will, as you look at this passage, the two emphases here that intersect with the thought in Proverbs. Intersect and expand on the thought in Proverbs that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. First, it says here in Psalm 14, those who deny God are corrupt and do abominable deeds. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works, the New King James says. Again, the folks who deny God are corrupt and do abominable deeds. Why? Why would you think the corrupt here are corrupt? Why do they do abominable deeds? Why? Excuse me? They have no fear of God, okay? And the fear of God is the beginning of what? Knowledge. Or elsewhere it says the fear of God, in Proverbs, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, okay? Proverbs 9:10, I think, okay? Well, I'm going to submit to you, it is because they have no fear of God, but it's because they lack the wisdom to do otherwise. And their denial of God leaves them with no grounds for moral and ethical behavior. Second, notice to continue here. Everyone with any genuine understanding or wisdom seeks after God. Notice the rest of what the passage says. The Lord looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek God. And so in both Proverbs and Psalms, to do otherwise than to seek after God and to have a fear of God is just plain dumb. Throughout Proverbs, these two concerns intersect. Wisdom is not to be found apart from God, and those who truly seek wisdom will find it in the acknowledgement of God. And they will never find it if they refuse to admit, to acknowledge that God exists. All right, so that's one of the things we learn from the book of Proverbs, that God exists, but there's more. We also learn that God created the world by wisdom. He not only exists, he created the world, okay? As we saw, as we just read in Psalms 14, points out, I keep gritting this thing up here, so I have to keep correcting it. I apologize for that. In Psalm 14, points out the foolishness of denying that there is a God. And I think this says a lot about why there is so much reckless behavior in our world today, so much immorality, so much violence, so much self-inflicted suffering in our world today. Denying God means a lack of wisdom, and nothing good can come from that. To highlight the foolishness of denying God, we're talking here again that God created the world by wisdom, okay? To highlight the foolishness of denying God as creator, think about some of the claims we often hear. There's the claim that the universe is here simply by chance and that there is no first cause, no creator. Again, this is back to my study in Christian evidences. What's up there? Okay, all right, okay. I continue to have problems with the thing here, okay? There we go. That God created the world by wisdom. Back to the ideas about Christian evidences, okay? And that our world is simply here by chance. Brethren, I got to tell you, I think I knew this all along, but when I did some studying about it, I don't know what y'all think, but such an idea as that is illogical, it's irrational, it's unreasonable, and quite frankly, it's unscientific, okay? Any introductory level science student knows that nothing comes from nothing. It's as simple as that. This irrational, illogical reasoning is where the blind denial of God exists. One of the books I have that I mentioned to you is a book entitled, I forget who the authors are now, but it's a book entitled, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Okay? And I'm going to submit to you, that's where I stand. Okay? We're here talking about that it takes a leap of faith to believe that there is a God. It takes a leap of faith to believe that God created the world by wisdom. Okay? I don't think so. It takes some faith, maybe, but I think there's abundant evidence. It takes more faith to believe that all of these things around us came from nothing. Okay? That's why these gentlemen, I think there are two authors of this book, if I remember correctly, that wrote this book, combined on writing this book, and they state, they don't have enough faith to be an atheist, and neither do I. Okay? Some try to modify this thinking by claiming some sort of primordial chaos out of which the orderly universe arose. Nothing in our world supports such a notion. In nature, there is never a progression from disorder to order, from disintegration to integration. Rather, it's always just the opposite. Let me ask you a question. This is what happens with your house, is it not? Those of us who own a home, okay? Those of us who own a house, okay? This is what happens with your house. As long as we don't do any damage to our house, as long as we don't do anything to destroy it, as long as we don't do anything to do any destruction to it, as long as we don't put a hole in a wall or something like that, our house never needs any repairs, does it? Huh?
Don't fall down.
Yeah, it'll fall down. No, that statement is untrue, okay? All right? And any of us who've lived for a while know that that's true. By the way, the same thing's true about your yard. You know, if you have a nice green lawn or whatever, you don't have to do anything to your lawn. You don't have to do anything to cause harm to it. You don't have to work with it. You don't have to do anything to it, okay, for it to gradually develop some weeds and things like that in it, okay? It'll never develop those weeds as long as you don't do any harm to it, okay? Again, we know that's not correct. You know, the fact that things always go from order to disorder, from integration to disintegration, all right? That's why we're always repairing our houses, even if we don't do anything to damage them. Others, however, will acknowledge that the universe appears to be designed by someone, but you know it really wasn't. You know, we wouldn't apply that kind of logic to anything else, so why to creation? When ruins of ancient cities are discovered by archaeologists, the immediate question is, what's one of the first questions that's always asked? When ruins of ancient cities are discovered by archaeologists, what's one of the first questions that's asked? They discover the ruins of an ancient city, okay? And there are buildings, you know, they discover the ruins of these buildings or whatever else were a part of this ancient city. What's one of the first things an archaeologist is going to ask? A historian might ask. Excuse me? Who did it? Who built these things? That's what they're going to ask, okay? So, if anyone suggested when that archaeologist asked that question, no one, they would look at, they just look like someone built them. Nobody really built them. They just look like someone built them. He or she would be laughed out of the scientific community. And buildings aren't nearly as complex as what we see in nature. You see, this reasoning is never applied to anything else in nature. You may have heard this story. This is one of the oldest ones out there. One of the proofs for the existence of God, that nothing comes from nothing. There's a story of the watchmaker. The guy takes off his watch, and I could take off my watch right now, okay, and say, okay, that what I'm going to try to convince you of is this watch. Nobody made this watch. All of the things that are part of this watch, whatever they are, all right, just kind of came together, from somewhere. And over millions of years, all of these things came together, okay, and became my watch, which I think is giving me the correct time right now. It says 12:01. I think it's pretty close, okay? Well, I'm going to go a little bit further than the watch. You see this cell phone that I have in my hand here, on which I can call my son who's in California right now and talk to him, on which I can text my son who's in California right now, and he can read what I just said to him on the text, and he can respond back to me, on which I can email anything I want to email, on which I can ask any question I want to, and it'll give me the answers to it and so forth like that, okay? All right. What I'm going to tell you, and I know this is a simple illustration, but I don't know about y'all, but it makes a lot of sense to me. What I'm going to tell you is, nobody made this. Apple didn't make this. I have an Apple Watch, okay? Some of you guys may have another one. I don't know. But mine's Apple, okay? But Apple didn't really make this. Apple didn't create this. This just fell together after so many years, okay? And it's able to do all of those things. Illogical, not reasonable, and so forth. I'll tell you one more thing, and then I'll go on from Christian evidence, okay? One of the things you have to do when you study Christian evidence is, I'm not a scientist. One of the most amazing things that I found out when I was doing some study in Christian evidence is one of the amazing things is all the constants that are put together that make our world work, okay? To make our universe work, that allow us to live here and so forth. You've probably heard the one, maybe you've heard the one about, if the sun were... if the earth, we're tilted, but if the earth was tilted on its axis just a fraction, I forget what the fraction is, closer to the sun, we'd all burn up. We couldn't live here, we'd all burn up. If it was tilted just a little further from the sun, we would all freeze to death and we couldn't live here, okay? All right? And that constant that allows us to live on this earth is so minute, so detailed, so small, okay? Well, that's one of the constants that allows us to live as we live in our world today. There's another one. I forget what it is now. I can't remember. And that constant has to be correct to a magnitude of 1/10 to the 40th power. Now, I don't want to make you all mathematicians, okay? But 1 over 10th to the 40th power, you know, things become smaller as you increase the numerator. 1/4 is smaller than 1/2. 1/8 is smaller. 1/16 is smaller. 1/32 is smaller, and so forth. Well, 1/10 is small, but 1 over 10 to the 40th power, that's 10 to the first power is 10. 10 to the 40th power is 10 followed by 40 zeros. So there's a constant that allows us to exist in our world that has to be correct by 1 over 10 to the 40th power. I don't remember which constant it is, okay? But that's how infinitesimal it is, all right? You're going to tell me that happened by accident? I'm sorry, I'm not buying it, okay? But here's another thing you have to have. You could bring a scientist into this room right now. I'm not a scientist. You could bring a scientist into this room right now, and that scientist could whip me big time in a debate. He could ask me, I know he could, any highly trained scientist with some number of degrees or whatever, okay, could ask me some questions that I'm sure I couldn't answer. And therefore, he might win a debate with me. And I realized that when I was preparing all of these things with the Christian Evidences study, and I did a little bit of science in that study, not too much, but a little bit. But here's one thing I came to know. He would know much more than I would know, okay, about scientific things. But brethren, we don't have to know all things to know some things, okay? And we don't have to know all things to know that our world's coming by naturalism or by macroevolution is not possible, okay? It's not logical, it's not scientific, and all of those things. Norm, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, for someone to say there is no God is an intellectually indefensible statement, because you would have to know everything there is and that God is not
Absolutely,
there.
yeah.
And nobody can. So to say there is no God is not a defensible statement.
Yeah, there's all kinds of philosophical things like that, okay, that can be quoted or whatever. And they get very involved, but you're exactly right, okay? All right. We could go on with this. I want to continue on. We have other areas we need to cover. We could go on to this, but let's just ask the question this. How foolish is it to suggest that there is design, but not a designer? That there is creation without a creator? But if I can get my slide to work, let's see if I can. All right. Proverbs doesn't just claim that there is a creator, but that creation is endowed with God's wisdom. I'm over a couple of slides. Let's see where I am. Here we go. That creation is endowed with God's wisdom. Turn to Proverbs chapter 3. Proverbs 3. Proverbs 3, and let's read verses 19 and 20. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the depths were broken up, and clouds dropped down the dew. Okay? So the claim is not simply that God wisely created the world, but it also functioned by the virtue of his wisdom. And I got a little ahead of myself. That's where the constants come into play. That how these things work, that our world functions according to and by the wisdom of God. All that God has made is infused with his wisdom. Wisdom herself claims in Proverbs 8, verses 22-31 to have been present and to have assisted in the creation. Let's read that. Go back to Proverbs chapter 8. We actually read this one time when we were talking early in our study about extolling the virtues of wisdom. But let's read it for a different purpose here. That again, to see that wisdom claims to have been present at the creation. Proverbs 8, verses 22-31. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his way. Before his works of old, I have been established from everlasting. From the beginning, before there was ever an earth. When there was no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no fountains abounding with water. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills I was brought forth. While as yet he had not made the earth or the fields or the primal dust of the world. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep. When he established the clouds above. When he strengthened the fountains of the deep. When he assigned to the sea its limits, so that the waters would not transgress his command. When he marked out the foundations of the earth. Then I was beside him as a master craftsman. I was his daily delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and my delight was with the sons of men. When it talks about I was there or whatever, if you read earlier in chapter 8, you'll find that it's talking about that wisdom was there, okay? There is no doubt that the wisdom of God built into creation is often obscured by the results of human sin. We often get criticized for this, and this is often an argument that, okay, well, what about sin? Well, humans are his creatures, but we don't always act like it. But that doesn't distract from the fact that he created us. It only illustrates how badly we often miss the mark of why we were created. Let's read one more passage before we go on from this. All right, turn back to Proverbs chapter 3. Proverbs 3. Proverbs 3, verses 21 through 26. My son, let them not depart from your eyes. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, so they will be life to your soul and grace to your neck. Then you will walk safely in your way, and your foot will not stumble. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. Yes, you will lie down, and your sleep will be sweet. Do not be afraid of sudden terror, nor of trouble from the wicked when it comes. For the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. Okay? Notice what's being stated here. Just after stating that the Lord created the world by wisdom, it says, since we live in a world created by wisdom, it only makes sense to acknowledge that wisdom and live by it. And if we do, according to the passage, notice the end of the passage. For the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. If we do those things, then the Lord will be our confidence and we can live confidently. We're going to run out of time. We've only got 5 minutes left. But one of the other things that we're going to note from the book of Proverbs is that God and his will can be known, okay? Some who are willing to admit at least the possibility of a creator still question whether or not we can know him and his will. But Proverbs tells us that we can know his will. Again, back to Proverbs chapter 2. Proverbs chapter 2. We read this earlier, but I want you to notice what else it tells us here in the early verses of Proverbs chapter 2. Let's read verses 1 through 9. My son, if you receive my words and treasure my commands within you, so that you incline your ear to wisdom and apply your heart to understanding. Yes, if you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding, if you seek for her as silver and search for her for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk uprightly. He guards the paths of justice and preserves the way of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice, equity, and every good path. All right? So look at the boldness of these promises. All right? It says if you seek for these things, if you seek for God's will, and we're making the point that God's will can be known and can be understood, then you will understand the fear of the Lord, verse 5 says, and find the knowledge of God. In verse 6, for the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. Okay? So, again, we will learn that God and his will can be known. We do need to note this, though, and we'll talk about this some more next week. The only way for us to know God's will is if He reveals it. The evidence, the revelation of God's will follows as a corollary to the reality of His existence and His creation of the universe. Why would He create the world and the people in it unless He wants us to know Him? Got a couple minutes left. I'm not sure if we have time to read this or not. Next week we will start here, and we're going to read a New Testament passage that tells us that we can know God's will. We're going to read from Paul the Apostle, his remarks in his sermon in Athens as he stood at the Areopagus, okay? And we'll see his point that indeed God's will can be known. Okay, just a couple minutes left. Any thoughts, any comments, any questions? All right. Appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.